Live. So let's just see if I am in reality. Oh, that's you. I was like, somebody's asking for something. So are we live? Let me just check my Instagram. See if we are live there. It says we are live. Okay, awesome. I don't see us being live, but I trust the process. I trust it. So hopefully we're live on Instagram and on YouTube. This is my first time using StreamYards to live stream. So it is a work in progress, a learning lesson, and hopefully we're up and running. It says that we are.
Yes,
So
make it do what it do.
yes. Anyway, thank you guys for coming in, or whenever you guys watch this, to Caregivers Corner. Really, I decided to do this because it is National Minority Mental Health Month, or BIPOC Mental Health Month, which was started by the amazing B.B. Moore Campbell, the author and advocate. And so as a caregiver myself, I really just saw a need for a place to provide just support and validation, insights and resources. And so I thought, you know what, why don't we do this podcast called Caregivers Corner, just supporting those people who are supporting others, because sometimes it is a very thankless job. So thank you guys for coming. And hopefully we share some things during this time that will be meaningful to you or meaningful to somebody that you know that you can also share. So to introduce my guest, the amazing Tiffany Lowery, marriage and family therapist and mental health advocate. Thank you so much for being here. We talk all the time about these things.
Yes. Thank you, Jillian, for having me. This is such an important conversation. I've had people hit me up about this specifically because we're just not talking about it enough, especially in the Black and Brown community. It gets normalized. The stresses of caregiving get overlooked and normalized in a way that we really need to focus on, because it's causing a lot of impact to our not only mental health but physical health as well. So thank you for having me. I'm excited.
No, of
Yes.
course. And no, I appreciate it. We can sort of jump right in. So we both been caregivers. I'm still a caregiver. And so and I think some people might not even realize that they're caregivers, but anybody who is so why don't we start there? Why don't we start with like just these different types of caregivers? And I know we have like long term and short
Right.
term. And so maybe just getting an idea of like what do we mean when we're saying that? What is the broad definition of that?
Right. Someone depends on you,
Mm.
basically, right? So that can look like I see a lot of clients currently dealing with aging parents. Sometimes they're caregiving for a child that has a mental illness or physical disability, right? So we often are helping family members with substance use. It can be anything. It can be, and again, kudos to Miss Jillian for Sound of Hope, All Things Possum
Oh,
Trot. Yes, absolutely. The
yeah,
movie did a
beautiful.
phenomenal job. Let me just say
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
But that is an example of what we're
Mhm.
talking about. Those families, you know, fostering and adopting those kids who had a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
That was not an easy thing to do. So
And
these are a few
I
examples, but yeah.
yeah, even things like, I used to have a dear friend, Miss Alice, who has since passed away, but I met her in her 80s. And, I
Mm,
wasn't a full-time caregiver to her, but I helped her. I did her bills and a plethora of things. And so she did depend on me. And so I think it can
absolutely.
even be people who are helping neighbors and with disabilities or physical challenges or elderly, like all of those things fall into caregiving. You don't have to be full-time. You can be a part-time caregiver
Absolutely.
and you still feel stressed. Even with Miss Alice, I
Yeah.
felt so extremely
Yeah.
responsible for so many things, and that was a little bit of a challenge because we weren't family. So
Mhm.
that balance of like where to draw boundaries and stuff, which I know we'll get into. One of the things and the reasons I really felt led to this caregiver talk is um, we often, right, give a lot of energy and concern to the person who is sick, rightfully so, right? So
Right.
the person who has the challenge,
Mm.
whether they're age related, whether they're have
Mhm.
chronic illness, a mental illness. So most of the resources are really dedicated, right, to those people because they're the ones in this acute distress, right? And oftentimes, like, people really don't think about the people who are taking care of them and like what that stress is like, and what goes on with that. So I really feel like it's sort of an underlooked population, right? Even the film I did, Broken,
Mhm.
even though it was about mental illness, it was sort of from the caregiver standpoint and just the frustration of caregivers who just, want to help and can't when it comes to mental illness. So, yeah. So we're thinking about these different kinds. Maybe we break it down into, I don't know, short term and long term. I feel like those are two different challenges. Like somebody with a shorter term illness, that you have to
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
we talked about that before, and then it has an end date for
Right.
whatever reason, or maybe the longer term chronic care. Maybe you can talk about those and
Yeah, I think
what the individual challenges of those might be.
right. And again, we're talking about the time it takes maybe for someone to recover or come out of that crisis state.
Hmm.
But the impact, not only to the person experiencing the illness, right, but the caregiver can have long term effects. So, in other words, it may be short term trying to find placement for someone, whether they
Hmm.
need to be committed for psychological reasons, whether they need to be put in a rehab facility, that's a shorter term. But what it takes to get there, the red tape sometimes can be traumatic,
Hmm.
right? A lot of closed doors sometimes. You make too much money, you don't quite make enough, you're right in the
Hmm.
middle, what resources are available. Grieving the person that you're caring for, their loss of their ability to, if they're an adult, right, take care of
Hmm.
themselves, or if it's a child, you see the what it's the illness has caused for them, right? So you're going to be experiencing that yourself and taking that on. So that can have long-term effects, even though that person, let's say it's cancer and they beat it,
Hmm.
right? Even though that changes the nights in the hospital, the diagnosis, what have they gone through that may always impact them, right?
Right.
So in best case scenarios, you get those resources, you're able to process the grief that you've gone through, because there will be some. These are life
Hmm.
altering events that are happening. They can be very traumatic. So, as you know, someone has
And
dementia. Hmm.
right now, how would you like? Right. So we both had moms that we cared for. How would you categorize that? Would that be considered long term or shorter? I mean, I know when they are older and have very very serious
Right.
health problems, it's there's going to be a finite amount of time you're going to deal with that. But how would you categorize something like that?
It
Like,
depends. So if it's something that I kind of use the cancer example. If
mm-hmm,
we're able to go see them go through treatment and they're in remission, depending on that period of time, that could be considered short or medium term.
mm-hmm,
Not that it's not going to impact them later
right,
emotionally, right? But that could be an example of a short term, getting someone placed right away, helping them find housing and things like that, right? If they're
mm-hmm,
mentally dealing with some mental illness or something like that, that can be a short term, extreme stress to get through that. More medium, maybe an ongoing thing. And then long
mm-hmm,
term, someone struggling with mental illness, getting help, not getting help, being able to find the right medications. So there's an ongoing, almost like a complex PTSD that not only the person dealing with the illness has to go through, but the trauma imposed by them onto the caregiver.
and even
Yeah,
some of those, I mean, like more debilitating physical, I guess, diseases are just kind of these long chronic
right.
disease that that kind of take a toll on your body over time. So it seems like the first kind is sort of an initial shock to your system that you get through,
Mhm.
and then you have to deal with the repercussion. And the other one is a longer, um, day to day sort of.
A reinforcement of the
Mhm,
illness over and over and over and over
right.
and over and over again
And so
of
thinking
what
about
you're
that,
dealing with. Yeah.
right? so in terms of what caregivers go through, right? So we talk about like the stress of it, and you kind of mentioned CPTSD. So I wanted to go through some of those things, like because I don't think people think of caregiving as sort of a traumatic
Right.
experience, because there are
Mhm.
a lot of positives, like like we were
Mhm.
talking about, which you can maybe discuss, those people who feel they feel needed, and it's a good feeling to help people. So it's very virtuous. Society
Mhm.
definitely says this is what you're supposed to do, and you are giving someone in need a hand. So that is a good feeling, and like the studies
Absolutely.
show that, right? So maybe talk about some
Absolutely.
of those good things about caregiving, and then we can talk about some of the toll that those things take, and what they look
Mhm.
like.
Yeah, so identity, right? So being in that role, there's going to be a sense of purpose and meaning making in life. Um, you get the accolades from whether family or friends or church members. Oh my God, what you're doing is so admirable. And that can feel good because you're giving back, right? Whether it's a family member or in your case, a neighbor, whoever that is, that feels good to be helping someone in need, right? So that feels great. Um, on the flip side of that, right? We often normalize that stress because in our community we're supposed to take care of our parents and our
Mhm.
children, and brothers and cousins and whoever. We're supposed to do that. We're conditioned to have to bear the weight of that no matter what. So
Mhm.
we overlook what we're feeling,
Mhm.
the anxiety, the stress, the lack of focus or concentration, the irritability, the anger that comes from
Mhm.
that, snapping at that person that we're caregiving for.
And is
Um,
that now are we kind of, so are these like symptoms where you kind of know like these are
yeah, something's wrong. I've got
Mhm.
maybe burnout. I need to look at what's going on. It's
Mhm.
no longer I have gotten these feelings of meaning making and purpose, but that's long gone. Now I'm starting to notice I don't want to help them, or I'm fatigued all the time. We talked about compassion fatigue and
Mhm.
vicarious trauma,
Yeah,
right?
can you like describe that, just because I like, it wasn't that long ago that I heard those terms for the first time.
Hmm.
I had never
Hmm.
heard of vicarious trauma. I mean, I guess I understood it when I heard it. I understood the concept, like, oh, I can see how
Right.
vicariously you can feel these things. But
Yeah.
maybe
So,
talk about those
mhm.
secondary stress things, um, vicarious trauma, compassion, maybe just give us a rundown of sort of what
Okay.
those things are, what those terms mean.
Right. So, compassion fatigue. So that might look like, again, this snapping back, right? Where I used to have patience with that person that I'm caregiving for. I used to be able to empathize in a way. I used to have take more care and be gentle in a way. I'm no longer doing that because I don't have the bandwidth,
So the
right?
empathy that maybe you had for them in the beginning starts to
Hmm.
erode over time, just because, and I
Exactly.
and I think this is part of the overall conversation, is that due to not really taking care of yourself properly,
Yeah.
would it happen anyway, but maybe it happens faster if you're not taking care of
It
yourself
it depends. I think we're gonna experience some level of that over
properly.
time, but I definitely setting boundaries with that person, with
Mhm.
other family members, with yourself. Absolutely, the self-care and the socialization piece are huge. So
Mhm.
those have to be in place to mitigate, the burnout
Mhm.
and the compassion fatigue, the
Well,
vicarious
what's
trauma.
vicarious trauma? Like, what would that?
So I'm experiencing, so that person has cancer, that person um, has a mental illness, that person can no longer speak, right?
Mm,
So whatever the illness is that they're dealing with, it's impacting me, right? In a way that, oh my God, I'm almost as a secondary response, the secondary, right? Or vicarious trauma, I'm traumatized through your experience. So
mm,
this can be on any level, right? It doesn't have to be caregiving. Friends, if you report a really traumatic, God forbid, sexual abuse, rape, you're sharing the story. That person now becomes impacted by your story through
Right.
vicarious trauma,
And
right?
I can totally see that. Like, when my mom was sick and going through cancer, I think even I was more um like a hypochondriac. I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's the spot? What's,"
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? It sort of put me on edge for my own health, and I would sometimes think, "Oh, is this something or is that something?" And I think I was just on
Mhm.
higher alert from being in
Yeah.
this situation, you know what I mean? And going through these things. So maybe it's just a manifestation of anxiety or something, but I definitely remember, wondering if I,
Mhm.
saw some bump or a spot or felt some pain, like, oh, what does that mean? Wondering
Right.
if I was sort of sick. So I don't know if that's like a response to
That's
vicarious
exactly an
trauma or.
example of that. Yeah.
Mhm,
Absolutely. And we see it in the world with events, right?
mhm,
So, killings, right? So we see it in racism. We see it, we watch the news, someone experienced this. Oh my God, that could be my son. That could be my child. That could be me,
mhm.
right? So
Right.
we're
It
experiencing
creates
that
that hypervigilance kind
vicariously.
of, yeah.
Right, right.
Mhm. And so when I think about those kind of challenges, so that those kind of stressors, right? Whether it's right, because we talk about just those are just some like trauma stressors, but there's the money, there's the time, there's the grief, there's all of these things that you're experiencing at the same time, you
Hmm.
know. And on one hand, right, it feels good to be able to help, but then when they're dealing with things that you can't help and the helplessness of that. So, you're sort of doing things in this futility. Um, how would you like, so there's the positive aspect of being helpful, but when you're doing these things just to keep them comfortable when they're not going to get well, and having to go through the motions of that while acknowledging that, or sometimes we don't, like sometimes we'll
Yeah.
go into
Yeah.
a real denial about things and like things are just going to be okay because almost your thinking has gone down to minute by minute or hour by hour, as
Hmm.
opposed to more broadly. So um I don't know, is there a
Well,
term
we
for
call
that?
it
Is
an
that
anticipatory grief. So
mm,
you know that day is coming, basically. And as much as we try to prepare, you can never really, right? So prepare
mhm,
yourself, rather. But that's the anticipatory grief. We're grieving, this is coming. And, again, our systems are still always on alert. When will the day be? Right?
yeah.
Will it be when I go in the other room? When will they, all of that? Your nervous system is on high alert. You're on
Mhm.
edge all the time, fear and worry and concern. But that's a part of this anticipatory grief, not to mention grief after the passing, if that's,
Yeah.
where they're
And
headed.
that's an interesting thing too, because so one thing about I think a lot of caregivers, if they feel very overwhelmed, right? So the studies will say that they almost never relax because, right, they're always in that higher state. But what you said is interesting, about like, yeah, will it be the next minute when I go in the next room? So for them to do self-care or for
Mhm.
you know the main caregivers to have a break, a respite, like, you know, they need other people to come in or they need to take them
Absolutely.
to some place. And how do you manage like needing help? Um, one, and being able to ask for it, because a lot of people like are happy that you're
Mhm.
doing it all. And so they will, they kind of leave you to
Let
it.
you.
Right, they just let you. So one, asking for help, and that can breed resentment. So then you kind of don't want to ask because they should have been here anyway, right?
Mhm.
But then when you do have help, how how can you ease that anxiety of are, are they going to get them the medicine on time? Is something going to happen while I'm gone? Right? It's
Right.
almost like you can't
Right.
like you can get in a situation where it's hard to win.
Right. Right. And I think doing some analysis in that moment. I mean, anyone caregiving, first of all, should be in therapy, period.
Mhm.
So you can get these tools and be checking in with yourself. One thing I'm always going to say, what can I control? So when I'm working with clients who are dealing with caregiving, what can you control? And if we start to practice that and not worry about the responses of family members, and this is way easier said than done, of course. But if we can get to that point, we take off so much of the worry and stress from our plate because we can't. I have to make the doctor's office call. I have to research this medication. I have to advocate for this. I have to call so and so to see if they can come in. That's my plate. Whether or not they can do, and once you start to only focus on the things you can do, it will help with the stress. And you'll check in. Is this something I can control, or is this something I can't? I can't control this. Okay, I should probably put it to the side as best as I can. And when those thoughts of guilt or shame come up around that, let me move from it. Let me reframe the thought. So these are some practical ways to, of course, it's not this easy. But
and because the idea of control, right? The idea of control is interesting too, right? Because I know when my mom was sick, I kind of felt like I was in this, like I felt the more I did, the more in control I was. The more lists I made, the more cameras I put up, the more I was on top of everything. It felt like I was in control, but I don't know if that's you know what I mean?
And those are great. Absolutely. Those are the things that you can look back and you can feel good and be like, okay, I did these things. I'm managing my environment in a way that I can. And that's what we all want to do, right? We want to manage our environment.
Take that next step and say, I have to trust that someone can come in, or I can take them somewhere and go, and you have to
what is the cost,
control, right?
The risk benefit of the things that I can't get done or the things that I don't do. And so it's really prioritizing, being able to say, okay, wait, I'm catastrophizing in this situation. Wait, what's likely to really happen? Okay, that won't likely, right? So you're constantly going to be checking in with your thoughts. What can I control? What can I not control? And what is the cost? What is it going to cost me if I don't do this thing? Okay, well, she won't get to go meet with whoever, or we won't get to go to her favorite ice cream place, or I won't get to spend this time this week with her that I would have gone. Okay, I'm willing to pay that cost. If it's something else, you may not be willing to pay that cost if it's going to put her in danger or something like that. But if it's just, this is a comfort I'd like to give this person and I can't because I don't have the bandwidth, that would be an indication of, okay, it's okay to pay that cost, right? So you're going to be weighing the cost benefit of some of the priorities that you're making and having, and the more you can control the environment, that's going to help you feel better about what you're doing. Now, not to the extreme of like take it, right? Because you have to delegate, you have to ask for help. Because
not to the extreme where you're saying of like trying to do it all yourself.
You can't do it all, right? You can't do it all. So sometimes
you have to like have some level of trust, right? You have to. I think that was hard for me to like release some level of control, right? So because you feel like you know how to do this, and I think maybe a lot of caregivers might have that, like because you know their routine, you know exactly what's happening, and so to really release that. And then sometimes things do get lost or missed or whatever. So now, you've done the thing you need to do to take a little time for yourself. But so it's that, but even if something goes wrong, like, then it's that, okay, well, I made the best choice at the time, and then forgiving yourself for whatever mistakes. Because I think there's not going to be a perfect situation like as much as we want, right? And so there has to be some balance of responsibility and forgiveness for self.
Absolutely. You're not. And I hear people but Tiffany, you don't understand. I have to do nobody, my brothers, my sisters, I have to. I understand, but you can't. So you're going to have to pick and choose those things. Something's not going to get done. It's just the way it is. And you, like you said, you forgive yourself, you do the best you can. And, we've talked a little bit about this. The people who are in these positions, caregiving in the first place, right? We got to look at what was the role in your family for you to be that person anyway. Why isn't it your brother or cousin or sister, or what is that,
Because and I think it's very gendered as well, right?
Absolutely.
Like, people are very very they're very forgiving of any guy who isn't the caregiver because it's not expected anyway. And
especially in
you,
our community.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially in our community. And then yeah, it's this is sort of your role and what you're supposed to do. Um, some places, I think Possum Trot, that movie, right, was an
Mhm, mhm.
excellent example of everybody coming together and bearing
Yes,
weight. But everybody's
yes.
situation isn't like that. So for the caregivers who don't have that support system and they are feeling stressed, well, first we talked about what some of these things
Mhm.
that they can experience, and then you started to go into a little bit of how you know it's like, so when you start to feel less empathy, when you start to snap,
For the
when
compassion
you start
fatigue,
to
right,
have less patience with, I guess, everybody,
right.
right? Not just the person who's sick, but
Yeah,
maybe in
so
general.
absolutely. Irritability, anger,
Mhm.
you've noticed like, "Wow, my anger is kind of high right now."
Mhm.
These can be signs,
What
be
about
feeling
sleep? What
beat
about
up.
like sleeplessness?
Absolutely.
Because I feel
Too
like that
much
was a
sleep or
mm,
lack of sleep,
mhm.
right? Too much sleep, lack of changes in your diet, eating habits, forgetting to eat, right? Overeating, all of
Yeah.
these things can be, um, just your mood in general. You've noticed that your mood is off. You don't want to do the things that you used to always take a daily walk. You're not taking your walk anymore. You're not doing the things that you used to enjoy doing. So
Right.
there's a lack of concentration. You can't focus. Low motivation. All these things can be signs of anxiety, depression, grief, right? Something's going on. There's some burnout. There's something going on that I need to address. So
Right.
if
And
you're
I think,
starting to feel that,
yeah. Right. I think that's so I think it's important to recognize in the moment, because then that's less recovery that you're going to have to do either once that's
absolutely.
over or once you realize it. I have so many friends. One friend, he took care of his dad while he had dementia for at least a year. It might have been two. And at the
Mhm.
end, he'd gained like 60 pounds. He was in
Yeah,
such poor health. He was having like lung
yeah.
issues,
Yes,
you
yes,
know.
yes.
I had another friend, he got in a horrible accident. So he was wheelchair ridden. And his mom was his caregiver, and
Mm.
she ended up with ovarian cancer and passing away before him.
Yeah.
And so I
Oh,
think our health does take a back seat when there's somebody else who is so ill in front of
wow.
us. And
Mhm.
so one, recognizing those things is huge, because you want to recognize them and get a handle on them one before your burnout is
Hopefully,
so extreme, right, that now
hopefully,
you
yeah.
actually can't deal with it anymore,
Right,
or now you have health problems, or
right, right, right.
so 'cause when, like, yeah, what does it look like when those things have gone to an extreme, so we kind of understand why it's important to catch them. Like, what does extreme burnout look like? Is it throwing your hands up and disappearing or walking away, or
Mhm,
which will only make
mhm, mhm.
the situation harder, right, for the person who
It
needs your
looks like
help.
what you just talked about, right?
Mhm.
Gaining a lot of health issues. Our health is directly related to the stress. CDC, there's all sorts of studies and research shows this is not new. We don't spend enough time talking about it. We get to the doctor with the diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's, heart disease, all these things, when in actuality, it could have been prolonged stress, right? Whether it's a relationship, whether it's caregiving, whether
Mhm.
it's work, your job, these are directly affecting our health. And we're not recognizing or realizing that. We're chalking it up to, well, that's the nature of my job, or yeah, this is tough, or this is what it's like. Once you start to understand, if you don't practice self care and boundaries as a caregiver, you will have health problems, period. They just go together. And so when you start to gain weight or you're not sleeping at all and you do start to develop somatic symptoms, right, or medical issues, you can see it and hopefully correct it. But
Mhm.
again, it's hard if mentally you're not able to motivate because of low mood, right,
Mhm.
or
Or
depression and
because you're
things like
so involved in everything that you don't even have
exactly
a moment. And so
to do
maybe
that.
let's
You
think
have
about
to take
some,
that time.
yeah, because sometimes it's just so, you're really so much into fight or flight, like you're so much
Hmm.
into cat brain, or like that instinctual, like what's happening next, trying to keep everything safe. Like just coming down and grounding a little bit and saying what's happening in reality, or and maybe even some
Yes.
fear about feeling what you're
Mhm.
actually in. It's easier to feel active and okay, well, I'm managing everything than to think about the
Doing,
fear
right.
of what's
Avoiding.
happening.
Mhm.
Right. So maybe let's talk about what to do about that, right? So some self-care habits, maybe some grounding habits, like what to do when you're in the midst of that storm,
Mhm.
or when you're in when you're in a situation that's gonna be lasting a while, and
Right.
it's gonna have these ups and downs, and to prevent burnout, because I have been
Mhm.
burnout. I'm still a
Mhm.
little
Mhm.
burnout, honestly.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
and when I
And
was
it comes and
really,
goes. It can come back.
yeah,
It's not like you
yeah,
get over something and you never have it again. No,
right.
it can come out again and again in various forms, you know?
Right. And like you said about identity, which was interesting. So I had kids young, right? And I remember when they graduated and I felt like a mountain was lifted off my shoulders just
Mhm.
because they survived and they
Mhm.
made it to 18, and I thought that was a
Mhm.
huge, accomplishment,
Absolutely.
and I didn't realize how much stress I was under. But then right after, I felt very useless, right? Like, because
Yeah.
parenting is this important thing that everybody,
Mhm.
oh, you're a great mom, you're a great mom. So then your identity becomes mom. And
Mhm.
then what about whenever you don't have that
Mhm.
role anymore? And so I found that even though I was burnt out, like literally I slept for like a year
Mhm.
after that,
Mhm.
but I almost looked for situations to jump back in
Absolutely.
and be that same person again, right? So
Absolutely.
I think that's what happens when you start to just act unconsciously, like just act off
Mhm.
of whatever some of those feelings are. So yeah, let's just talk about
Yeah, I
how.
wanna this is really good, the
Right,
point you're bringing up now, and then I'll jump back to the grounding,
right.
tools. But so, absolutely, our identity gets so tied up into what we're doing. Doing. We get the validation, we feel good about ourselves. We're conditioned in this society to do, produce, to do, and that's how we gauge self-worth,
Yeah.
which is dangerous. We've all been guilty of it, but that's how we gauge self-worth. And so not only that, but specifically that's why we have empty nest syndrome in terms like this, right? And even after a loved one has passed on, or a care, if we've been taking care of parents and they pass on, who am I without being a caregiver? Who am I if no one needs me
Mhm.
every day, day in and day out? Who else am I?
Mhm.
That was big for me. I had
Yeah.
to, okay, wait, what was I doing before I was a daughter? Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Helping my mother. Like, who was I before a caregiver?
Yes.
I had to
Right.
remember, like, wait, I know there's other parts of me. I had to go
Mm.
find that again because so much of my identity was wrapped up into caretaking.
That's
And I
such
was,
an amazing point. Like,
yeah.
and I had my kids in my teens. So I don't even know that I had a before necessarily. So then
Hmm.
to have to create that as an adult is a really weird thing
Yeah.
to have to
It
do. You know what I
definitely,
mean? It's like
yeah.
such a process. So but I feel like grounding is part of that process too, right? Because for
Hmm.
me, who I, definitely see PTSD, like, and some ADD
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
So like you're so up in the air thinking about so many things, to even be still and listen to yourself and what you need and find who was I before or who am I going to be now.
Hmm.
Because, with, especially with, I don't know if you feel the same way, but when my mom passed away, it definitely feels like a Jillian before that event and like who am I now, right? And
Yes.
so but I do think figuring out how to get quiet and getting comfortable getting quiet,
Mhm.
because that's a
Mhm.
hard thing to do when you're used to
Yes.
moving. When your
Yeah.
identity is in what you're doing, when you're not doing anything, my therapist would be like, you can just be. Why you should
Yes.
have permission to just
Yes.
exist. And it's so
Just
foreign
be.
to me.
Mhm.
But I feel like somewhere it's wrapped up in grounding too. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
right.
I mean, that's how you get there. That's how you
Mhm.
get to just being, right? So what you're being intentional about sitting still, literally. some clients, I tell this, literally sit on your hands and
Mm-hmm.
breathe, just be. So it's about undoing so much of what we've learned. And we're all, for those of us complex PTSD and doing, it's a state of crisis all the time. And we have lived in that space, and it's difficult to come out of that because someone needs to need me. I need to be doing something. So first off is just checking in. What am I doing? Am I rushing to the next project to save someone or something? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What does this look like? I'm burnt out. I need rest. But why have I signed up to go to all these birthday parties? What am I doing? Right? Check
Yeah.
in with yourself and ask that. Everything is going to be self talk, watching your negative self talk, what you shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? All of that type of language, self compassion. Okay, what would I tell my friend? I would tell my friend, girl, it's okay. You can say no. You shouldn't have to. Da, 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 da. All of that applies to us, and we don't do
I,
it.
I
So
think
these are
I
the
think
things
for
you're
people
going
who
to
aren't
ask
used to
yourself.
that, right?
Yeah,
Those people who aren't used to speaking nicely to themselves. I love
right.
the idea, like you're saying, like, then what would you say to your good
What
friend?
would you
Because
say to your
normally,
good friend?
right, a lot of times we talk to them a little, like, much better than we talk to ourselves. I know, at least in my
Absolutely.
case, that's true. And then, so going on with that, like, what about the boundaries? Because, right, like,
Mhm.
some of those we're imposing on ourselves. If we're saying we'll
Yeah,
be at all these parties, and
most. Yeah.
right, but then when you are the person who what was shown to be responsible, you showed
Hmm.
yourself responsible, and so now there's all these people that might need you. Maybe talk about boundary setting and how to deal with the guilt of boundary setting, what that
Hmm.
really means, because I
Hmm.
think when you're burnt out, then you start to get upset when people keep asking you for things, and
Right.
you almost blame them, like, why do they keep asking?
Right. They know better than to ask
Right,
me, and I got all this weight
right,
on my plate. No, they don't know better because they've always been the person to ask to get their needs met. It's not, you know, their fault that they're asking. We
right.
have a choice to say no to them.
Hmm.
They learned, I'm going to keep asking and pushing to get what I need. We learned, let me make sure they're taken care of. Right. So, absolutely, we get to say no. It's difficult for us to set that boundary, but
Hmm.
we get to say that, okay, what is on my plate? This doesn't make sense. Okay. Again, what would I tell someone? Well, it doesn't mean I'm not a good friend if I don't go to the event or if I can't show up a certain way, or if
Right.
it's a family and I'm asking for help for the caregiver. Sometimes we won't because of dynamics, right? It's like, no, I need this. So let me ask. If they say no, they say no.
Right.
And I have to be okay with their response. They have a right to say whatever they want to say, right? In terms of
Mhm.
yes or no or helping. I have to be okay with that. But again, what I can control is getting the
Mhm.
need met. This, my child needs this, whoever needs this. I need to ask to get that need met. And
Mhm.
it may not be family, it may be a neighbor, it may be somebody from book club that you would
Mhm.
never ask for help, but guess what, you didn't, maybe they offered. Oh
Mhm.
girl, Jillian, I heard about what you're dealing with, just let me know. I got tons of food, we can always stop. Absolutely, let them do that, right?
Right.
So then you're going to be checking in with yourself. Am I not wanting them to do that because I'm afraid of any shame or guilt that may come up? Old
Right.
messages. What? You let some stranger deliver food to you? Y'all ain't got enough
Oh,
money?
wow, yeah.
All of
And
that,
that's a
we
big
know,
thing in our
yes.
community too, a big barrier in people, because I did have caregivers come in and help with my mom, but,
Hmm.
later, like, a lot of people would ask me, "Oh, how did you do this?" or "What did you do with this?" And the hesitance to even want anybody to come in the house, and I was like, "Well, I don't
Hmm.
know. I don't know how I would have gotten through that without some help."
Hmm.
But people just, yeah, from whether it's just paranoia or suspicion or privacy, which can be deep in our community. Like, a
Right.
lot of times we refuse help. So that's one thing. And then I have this other friend who, like, so a guy kept calling to ask him for some money, a cousin or something. And he was so mad. He's like, I'm gonna block him. I was like, well, did you say no? That
Right.
I can't give you any.
Right.
And he was like, why is he asking me? And I was like, well, because he's asking you, but why can't,
Hmm.
the more interesting thing is maybe why can't you say no?
Yeah.
And it was such a hard, I mean, we actually talked about it for a while. And then we kind of got to like some level of identity. Like, I think he didn't want to be seen as not being able to give the money,
Right.
or it made him feel insecure because he wishes he was more financially stable. So it actually was triggering, just the
Yeah.
other guy asking
Right.
was triggering all these other things, but then made him so angry at this guy because he didn't even know why. But so I
Yeah.
think it's always important to maybe think deeper, like, what is really bothering me
Right.
right now? Okay, the guy asked me for money. Why is that upsetting me? I always find if I'm too upset about something
You're
small, I
triggered.
I need to stop for a second and say,
Yeah.
okay, what's
What's
really
really
bothering me?
happening? Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, I'm uncomfortable. Okay, why am I uncomfortable? And then you sort of start to get down into like whatever it is. Like, am I insecure about money? And so
Mhm.
that's why I'm angry when somebody asks
Mhm.
me, and it
Right.
was, yeah, it was such an interesting conversation that we just do things sometimes so unconsciously, or
Yeah.
blame others when we do need to, look a little bit more within, because we are always a part of this thing and whatever's happening. Or the
Yeah.
pride of not asking for someone's help, or getting past the, well, they should have been here anyway, I shouldn't have to say anything.
Right. But you do, because people aren't mind readers, A. And, they're probably not wanting to help, right? Who wants to go change diapers or sit, like, who wants to do that, right?
Mhm.
So, being able to you have to ask and delegate. You have to at least do that. And again, if it's not your family, and most of the time, often, I don't want to say, but often it's not,
Mhm.
it can be a church member, a coworker, it could be whoever. However,
Mhm.
you have to build that support system, but you have to build it.
I think
You
that's
have
good.
to build it.
Yeah, maybe. So for those people who don't have support structures and
Mhm,
don't, it's not natural to them. So you mentioned
mhm,
like church organizations, if they're not religious, or if they don't, or if they're in a mega church, so then that's
mhm.
harder to know people. That's, huge out here in
Right.
LA, or all over now, really.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe you can give some tips on just how
Whoever is in
to
their
build.
sphere. So
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be an organization. It can be a friend. It can be, again, coworker, you don't want to blur certain lines. You want boundaries with that. But especially if they're offering,
Yeah.
you want to accept that help. And something you talked about, being able to relinquish that control and trust that they'll
Mhm.
be okay. I had cameras in my house, and I would have people come and sit with her at time. I did what I could do, and that helped me feel better about relinquishing that. So you can put certain things in place for that. Um, but yeah, it may not be someone that was the closest.
Mm,
You may have to run a background check and hire somebody. You may have to, however you find that help. So and so cooks on some, whatever, how many times a week. And yes, please, we would love that. Right.
right.
And then again, cost benefit. What am I paying? Oh, I may be embarrassed because somebody will say, oh, you couldn't do it all. Okay. But what am I gaining from it? I'm gaining
Mhm.
hours of my time where I'm not physically cooking it.
Right, and just mental, a couple hours,
Yes.
an hour or two where I don't
To
have to
sit
think about this
still, to
or
not
make the
have to,
dinner.
absolutely. What I'm benefiting from is way outweighing the embarrassment or whatever I think, which is all in our heads, of what
Right.
the other people, may be thinking.
Yeah, and, like, I also think because we were similar in our moms, like, we both live in LA, and I think your
Mhm.
mom, was she in Kentucky?
She was. I went there for a year, and then I brought her here
Right,
for a
and then
year.
right, and
Yeah.
then mine was in South Carolina, so it's not like we've lived in these places to have these huge
Mhm.
support structures,
Right.
where they are.
Right.
So, yeah, it's an interesting thing when to have to build that, and a lot of times, like,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
me, I did have
Mhm.
to figure out the insurance system and everything, and
Yes.
bring in luck, and, maybe I'll do another talk about that, because anybody with aging parents, they need to be
Mhm.
on a lot of that stuff early
Absolutely.
and have things in place before things
Absolutely.
get dicey,
Yeah.
and then
Including guardianship, conservatorship, power of attorney, these types of things, preparing for that in advance.
putting things in
Absolutely.
trust, all of those
Yeah.
things are, really
Yeah.
helpful, especially if I ended up having caregivers come in, and there's a lot of rules, like to
Mhm.
what people can own, like how many assets
Absolutely.
they can have. And then
Absolutely.
there's asset recovery once they pass away, where they come. So there's a lot of ways to mitigate those
Mhm.
things, which is too many to go into now. But
Right.
thinking about those things is definitely important. And maybe I'll make a mental note to maybe go
Mhm.
deeper into that in another podcast, just to give resources. Because I honestly, if I didn't have
Yeah.
caregivers coming in. I mean, because most states have it where you can be the caregiver and get paid,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I actually needed the space and the
Absolutely.
time. Like
Yeah.
I needed someone to make that
Absolutely.
dinner, and that
Mhm.
made it so much more helpful. So, and that, I guess, maybe was a sort of a form of
Self-care for you to be
self-care
able
for
to delegate and go take care of your needs in that
me.
hour, 2, 3, whatever you. Yeah, I did like a combination. So I had in-home supportive services where I was the care, but then I also, she had, multiple strokes in and out of rehab and facilities. So I was able to build a few of those CNAs
Yeah.
at the facilities that I trusted
Oh,
that would come
nice.
into the home. And I could, and again, I'm basically working to pay the money to just pay for
Right.
those, but
Yeah.
either
I use
way,
care.com. I don't know if you heard of that. So I should add that to
Mhm.
the resource list, because I have a resource list on the site, and kind of got them from care.com and then brought them over. And some of them worked so
Yeah,
well and became just, was
yeah,
with me all the way to the end. So that's a great self-care, I think, option. And then, like, what else would you say? So I definitely, like, I wasn't really in therapy before my mom got sick.
mhm, mhm.
Like being in therapy during that time probably saved my sanity. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Um, just a grounding, that was kind of a grounding place. So when I'm just in the air, there was like an hour or an hour and a half where I had to just sit and be with everything,
mhm,
process everything. 'Cause the more you can sort of process those things in real time, I think it's better. And I am
mhm.
talking more about this kind of more, you know,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
the aging parent, so you're going through this
mhm,
death
mhm,
process, and so that's a very hard
mhm.
thing to go through. So definitely, you're a therapist. I'm a huge therapy advocate. I do think that is an essential of self-care.
Yeah,
Um, so in addition to that, what would you say? And getting that support group together is a huge part of self-care.
mm.
Maybe coming, get
And
it back to yourself, the walks, getting.
socialization, the walks are imperative. This trauma, this stress lives in our bodies, and so if we can just move that on a walk.
Mhm.
Sometimes we're such in crisis mode all the time that if I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So on the
Yeah.
very bottom are basic. If we're not getting sleep and rest and food, the health, if we're not able to think or plan or strategize, we're not going to think about, ooh, they need this or they need that, or let me call so and so on Monday. We can't think of
Right.
any of that. All we're
Mhm.
doing is stressing. So the
Right.
walks provide a space for that. Deep breathing. I'm a huge advocate for deep breathing. Slowing your heart rate down will lower your blood pressure. I
You hum
do.
breathe? My therapist is a big fan of hum breathing to get
Okay.
you kind of out of
Yes.
that fight or flight mode.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. I do
Hum
tapping.
breathing is just taking a deep breath and then you hum it out, right?
Right.
And when
So
you say
there's
take deep
multiple.
breaths, are you doing like
So people
count?
do different, sometimes I'll have people go in, or me myself, when I do it, I'll go in, let's say 3 or 4 seconds and go out longer. That's a
Mhm.
technique I'll do sometimes. Um, I don't want people to get caught up, we don't have
Yeah,
to get caught up in that. It can look like anything,
just
right?
slowing it down.
But it in the moment when you know that the anger erupts or there's this big emotional outburst, even if it's just stopping yourself and okay, and the self-talk has to start.
Mhm.
Be aware. Most of us know what's positive and negative, right? We at least know it. It's difficult to change it, but do that. I'm okay. I'm safe. Everything's
Mm-hmm.
going to be all right. I got this. I got this. I got this. This is hard what you're doing, but I got this. I'm going to be okay. Just take them. It's okay to sit here for it's okay. I promise
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. Right? These have deep breathing. I'm a huge tapper, the
Yeah.
emotional freedom technique,
Mm-hmm.
right? Right?
Yeah.
So this sucks. Tears
Yeah.
streaming, tears streaming. This sucks. But I love and accept myself and I'm going to be okay. Tears
Yeah.
streaming down, whatever emotion you're feeling, you're acknowledging the emotion and you're affirming it's going to be okay. Whatever words you want to use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these are just energy points, right? And you just keep going through the meridians,
Yeah,
right?
and so for people who haven't done tapping, it really is
Mhm.
so grounding
Mhm.
and calming. And along with the
Yes.
affirmations, and even just the simple one that I am safe. That was always
I'm
just a
safe.
huge because like you feel very unsafe when you're in these anxiety driven
Yes.
environments. Like you feel
Yes.
like the world is going to end at any moment or what's going to happen next
Exactly.
or is there a bomb about to go off,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
figuratively.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
getting back to that place, and that's something you can do anywhere and every day.
Anywhere, anywhere. I have another one I love, my 5 4 3 2 1 grounding technique. So I have clients pull off on the side of the road and do this in the car. They're in the grocery store. Anytime you feel that heart racing, or it doesn't have to be, you can be okay and just take a moment to practice any of these mindfulness techniques,
Mhm.
right? You don't
And
have
when
to
you say
be in a
five, four,
state
three, two,
of.
one, is that a
So
specific?
so 5 things you can see. So you're
Mhm.
literally going to look around the room wherever you are and in your head out loud, however you want to do it, right? Like I said, some people do this in public, so they're not audible, but they're looking at what they see, what's on the wall, what's around them in the car, whatever.
And can it be
And then
anything? I know I've heard of like find five
anything,
red things or five blue things, like kind of.
anything. Yeah, you can
Mhm.
do that. You can do that
Yeah.
strategy. That's going to slow you down even more. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch you without getting up and moving, right? Or what's touching you. Sometimes it's a tag or underwire or something. When you really really hone into your senses, and you will be amazed at what you are like, oh wow, you know there's
Mhm.
this extra little knot on the heel of my sock that I'm feeling right now, or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste, and it doesn't have to be that order. You can end up saying more things you can taste, or if you
Mhm.
can, or those tend to get a little harder. But it can be 5 things you can hear. It doesn't have to. The point is, you're going to go from a dysregulated state to
Yeah.
help calm you down, and it
Mhm.
takes you back, helps you get back in your body just enough to pay attention to, okay, I'm safe, all of those things, right?
All is
Doesn't mean
well.
you've
So to to
forgotten
be in the
about what's
present moment.
happening. Yeah, it
Right.
doesn't mean you've forgotten about the stressor, right? Of course not.
Right.
But if you can just get back to being in your body, being present again, now you can make a choice about what is your next thought. What are you doing next? You know what? I think it is a good idea to go deep breathe. I think it is a good idea to go watch my show. I think it is a good
Mhm.
idea to whatever coping tool you want to use, right? Now you have enough awareness that you can actually make a choice. Before you weren't able to,
Yeah.
right? So it just helps with that. 90 seconds. Dr. Jill Bolte, um, she talks about that 90-second physiological response that happens when we're triggered or there's some emotional dysregulation. That usually flows through our bodies in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
After that, it's what we're thinking that's on loop that keeps it
Mhm.
there. So
Right.
if we can change and reframe that just enough to help that feeling dissipate in the moment, right?
Right.
This is a crisis moment. Now, there are other moments we need to honor the emotion. Okay, identify what I'm feeling. It's okay. It'll pass. I'm doing good. I'm safe.
Mhm.
Okay, this sucks. This hurts. But we're often trying to dismiss what we're feeling and hurry up and move on. And we don't want to feel that. Sometimes it's necessary, because
Yeah.
that's how, if we're not feeling it, it leads to burnout and we're not addressing it.
Yeah, no, I think thank you. I think that is so important, and I think it's so important to one, right? Because you're talking about living in the present, and a lot of times our thoughts are what happened and why we're feeling whatever about that, or oh my God, what's going to happen. So, kind of getting into the present moment is such a an important thing, and having the mind to make those choices because like if you're a caregiver, you're dealing with people with some problems that are
Mhm.
significant, um and it's easy to make that bigger than your own needs. So,
Absolutely.
right? And
Yeah.
sometimes in some moments it is, you know what I mean? If there's a
Mhm.
huge crisis, like
Yeah.
okay, like we have to, but at some point in your day, like there needs to be some daily self-care. And I think those are all great ideas of what people can actually do, in the moment, and just see how
Mhm.
it changes your life, see how it
Yeah.
changes that day, or see how it changes how you can handle the
Mhm.
next thing if you don't have to be in crisis about it. It's much easier said than done, but I think
Yeah.
putting those daily practices um, in practice in
Mhm.
actuality,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
it's a huge start. Like just knowing, and just knowing that you need to do it and that you deserve it are
Absolutely.
huge
That part, that you deserve it.
yeah,
Yes. Because
yeah.
someone else along the line, we've adopted that we have to struggle, that we have to be putting others' needs before our own, always abandoning
Hmm.
ourselves. But it can look like 5 minutes of gratitude in the morning. It can look like
Hmm.
your coffee and your croissant, just time for that. It can look like a bunch of things, FaceTiming a friend because you guys can't
Hmm.
meet for brunch because you can't leave,
Right.
right? In the right, whatever that looks like, but making sure you set some time aside for
Hmm.
yourself every day. It seems
Yeah.
impossible, but I promise it's not. What's impossible is we have convinced ourselves that we can't do it. But
Right. And because
yeah,
other
but
things
we
are more
can.
important.
But
and
we
and i
can.
and i
Yeah.
always say, like, if you are a caregiver, or that's been your
Hmm.
role, like, then if you're not okay, then everybody is really in trouble. And so I even if your compassion tends to be for others, know
Hmm.
that taking care of yourself is a part of taking care of other people, because you have to
Absolutely.
be
You
right,
have to be
whole
okay
and
to care for
well,
anyone
and
else.
your
Yeah.
well-being has to be in order to, even like you said,
Hmm.
even in order to take care of them in a better way. So
Right.
even if you don't want to make the focus about you,
Right.
right, just knowing that the better you are, the better you're going to show up in these situations,
Hmm.
and that you really do deserve so much compassion. I have so much compassion for caregivers. It's you know because a lot of times the people who aren't there will have so many judgments and so many thoughts, and so you're dealing with this hard
Right.
thing and then these ideas and then somebody else's suggestions who
Hmm.
has no idea, like, and have
Yeah.
you thought about this, and there's
Hmm.
such
Hmm.
a heavy load.
Hmm.
So and are there any other, like, resources that you would recommend, or any final
Um,
words of advice for caregivers who may struggle, right, with self-care and staying in a good mental space.
mhm. Well, again, I'm going to stress, get a therapist, period. Because again, there are going to be things that you don't even know you don't know, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so having someone challenge old negative thinking or I'm supposed to be a certain way, that is just so important,
Hmm.
right? The psychoeducation around that and specifically grief, because this is what this is. You're grieving your life that you used to have that you no longer have anymore because you're caretaking. Identity, who are you now in this role? And again, the vicarious trauma of what the person you're caregiving for is experiencing. So there's
And if,
so much that you're going
and
to
if
be
they have
dealing with.
that longer term illness, mental illness, or something that's debilitating, it's like
Right.
those are two different things. But similarly,
Mm-hmm.
those people and what they were able to do before, that's a different thing that's going to go on now. And so that longer term
Mm-hmm.
is such an important thing, to learn those boundary setting, and the continual self-care, and all of those things, because it's such a challenging thing. And I think I'm yeah I you know there's
Mm-hmm.
resources, I know in California, I'm sure, and I hope in other places too, where you can even have
Mhm.
sliding scale if there's insurance
Absolutely.
issues, or
Absolutely.
on this resource list, I put some online options. But have
Mhm.
you seen like that kind of thing be a
Well,
big barrier?
yeah, I would say, start with, if you're looking for a therapist, and again, if you're that person, Tiffany, Jillian, this is great, but you guys don't understand my circumstance. This is
Hmm.
still for you too. I know it seems like it may not be, but you can shift the perspective on being a caregiver and what that means, and rally in support in other ways and resources and options. But so much of it is how you're perceiving what you feel your role and duty is and expectation. That is where the the magic happens, really.
Hmm.
Once you understand, like, oh, I can ask for help. It is okay. I don't have to carry the weight of all of this by myself. So that first, ask for help. That would be my
And I
biggest
feel
thing.
like doing it earlier is even better, because by the time you're getting close to burnout, everything seems like too
Oh,
much.
absolutely.
Like by the
The
time you're
second
like
you
done,
know
like,
you're having to
no,
be responsible for somebody, you get stuff
yeah,
lined up immediately.
yeah. Once
And
you're
and
working on
sometimes
fumes,
we
it's
don't, because we think,
right.
"Oh, this is easy right now," or, "We can handle it," or no.
Hmm.
There's gonna be a time. This is something to absolutely get on top of beforehand if you can, but if not, it's never too late to get help.
Yeah,
It's never too
yeah.
late to go. Insurance, I would say, if you have insurance, go through insurance first. If there's any sort of gap insurance, um, the caregiver, their insurance for maybe mental health, therapy themselves.
Mhm.
But what type of insurance does the person you're caring for have? There may be options that will help both of you. um, but also, I mean, if you, whatever your local area is, Google, there's tons of things that come up. I would say for sure get a support group. Get in a
Mhm.
support group so you can hear the stories. You're not alone, and it
Yeah.
feels like you are. Hear from other families, other people dealing with the same thing you're dealing with. Get help in terms of a group. 988 is a national hotline. So, all things that you may be dealing with mentally, whether it be really low mood, depression, anxiety, fears, whatever that may be, that you are getting like, I don't quite trust myself. All things mental health will be that 988 hotline. So that's definitely a great read. You can text people. This is too
Mm.
much. This is overwhelming. You can text and I just have a conversation for someone that can hold space with you if you don't feel like there's anyone else. Some clients just do that. And there's
Mm.
someone extra to hold space with them when they don't have some of these other supports. So in-home supportive services, usually through state and federal funding, there's going to be someone federally and state that can help support
Mhm.
with some of these things, again, depending on income.
Right. And
But yeah,
also depending on what the nature of your caregiving is, right? Because a lot of this will be different if you are
right,
dealing with someone with mental illness, or
right.
right, that's kind of more physical, or like literal
Hmm.
physical disability, like, so if they have, MS, or some, or or Alzheimer's,
Hmm.
like those
Hmm.
things. But the mental health thing is another challenge that we'll talk about at another time. But I think that those are definitely great resources. The support groups, so many things online now.
Hmm.
I just, I think that those opportunities are there to get support, and I just encourage everyone to take
Yes,
advantage of it. And like you said, if you can build your
yes.
support group out early, sometimes things happen like that, and then we didn't have an opportunity. But early on, when my family member had a mental health crisis, NAMI was amazing. So that's the
Oh,
National Alliance
yes,
for Mental
yes. How
Illness.
could I forget NAMI? Yeah.
NAMI's awesome.
Hmm.
They have a peer-to-peer program, which is actually a program only for family members.
Mm,
So the person with the mental illness doesn't even come. It is
right,
literally only
right,
for the family members to understand what's happening and
right.
process and give those sorts of tips. So I think that was instrumental,
Hmm.
because that's a difficult, those are two different worlds and two different set of circumstances and
Right.
issues that you have to deal
Hmm.
with, right? And so I,
Yeah.
and I found that, through social workers or something at the hospital, but like it's all at
Yeah.
our fingertips, and I really just encourage you guys to get the support you need. Know that you are not alone. Like
Hmm.
we, have been caregivers. I have been a caregiver in so many
Right.
capacities, and know how
Oh, and
difficult it is.
Al-Anon. I almost forgot about Al-Anon.
Al-Anon is
And it
great.
doesn't necessarily have to be that a parent was an alcoholic specifically. It was created out of that, but it can be, a myriad of illnesses that a parent,
Mhm.
as long as you're affected in some way, being in that group absolutely
Dysfunction,
can
right?
be very,
Right.
yes.
What about ACA? ACA is great. So AC, have you? Yeah, and so ACA is the Adult Children of Alcoholics. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it has you
Same
do
thing.
not
Yeah.
have to have had any. It's only like if you had any kind of dysfunction, right,
Mm-hmm.
which can lead to some codependence, which a lot of caregivers kind of
Absolutely.
have. But they actually have virtual support groups literally all day,
Mm-hmm.
and you go and you just talk. Like, you don't, it's not even like a feedback sort of thing. You can
Right.
just sort of say wherever you are,
Mm-hmm.
express yourself, and they just hear you.
Right.
So there are, and I'm going to add some of these to the list as
Oh,
well.
good. Yeah. Because
Yeah,
those
I
are good.
will, because they're great. I've done some of those ACA online
Mhm.
meetings, and there's just a lot of resources that I think a lot of people don't know about. But yeah, thank you so much. There's caregiving is so big, and there's so many
Yeah, I know
facets.
we just
So it was
touched on it a little bit, but yes,
right, it
it's
was
a
hard for
big
us to even narrow
umbrella.
it down, because I was like, oh my goodness, what about this
It's
and
a
this and this?
lot.
Right, but hopefully that just kind of gave you an overview of like what you might be experiencing, because I really don't think people know that they're in trauma when they're caregiving, but you are experiencing so much. And
Yeah.
then just permission to take care of yourself, and some
Mhm.
tools to take care of yourself. And on that note, I also made these caregiver affirmation cards that are available on joinjillian.com. Did you get a chance to see them?
I looked at some of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are good. I
Did you
need to
like
go
them?
back and really so
Yeah.
I can help promote it
And I think
and
that can even be one of those things that you just take a second to look at a card and think about that, just to get
mhm,
you out of thinking about all the other things that are going on,
being
or just to
intentional.
take a
Yeah.
moment to center. So I
Mhm.
really liked the thought of those. So anyway, those are free if you go to the site to download, and we'll definitely be having more conversations. Like I said, it's such a big issue, but we definitely wanted to get this in during BIPOC Mental Health Month, because I think our community, it affects us disproportionately in so many
Absolutely.
ways, including the fact that we usually, especially aging parents
Right.
or sick, we usually do that in the home. Like, that's a very, and maybe it's a Southern
Mhm.
tradition too, but
Yeah.
like that's a big
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
to do in the home, and
Yeah.
an important thing to do, but it's also really important to take care of yourself. So that is what our wish is. Take care of yourself, get the help that you need, and know that you are not alone.
Yes.
Thank you, Tiffany. I
You're
appreciate you.
welcome. Thank
And
you
we'll see
so
you
much.
guys
This
next
was a great
time.
conversation. Thank you,
Yes.
guys.
Thanks. And I'll leave all Tiffany's info too in down below. She's an amazing therapist and resource. So thank you so much.
Bye.
Let's see.